The White Hare and the Crocodiles in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The White Hare and the Crocodiles by Ozaki. Long, long ago, when all the animals could talk, there lived in the province of Inaba, in Japan, a little white hare. His home was on the island of Oki, and just across the sea was the mainland of Inaba. Now the hare wanted very much to cross over to Inaba. Day after day he would go out and sit on the shore and look longingly over the water in the direction of Inaba. And day after day he hoped to find some way of getting across. One day, as usual, the hare was standing on the beach, looking towards the mainland across the water, when he saw a great crocodile swimming near the island. "This is very lucky," thought the hare. "Now I shall be able to get my wish. I will ask the crocodile to carry me across the sea." But he was doubtful whether the crocodile would consent to do what he wanted. So he thought instead of asking a favor, he would try to get what he wanted by a trick. So with a loud voice he called to the crocodile and said, "Oh, Mr. Crocodile, isn't it a lovely day?" The crocodile, who had come out all by itself that day to enjoy the bright sunshine, was just beginning to feel a bit lonely when the hare's cheerful greeting broke the silence. The crocodile swam near the shore, very pleased to hear someone speak. "I wonder who it is that spoke to me just now. Was it you, Mr. Hare? You must be very lonely all by yourself." "Oh no, I'm not lonely at all," said the hare. "But as it was such a fine day, I came out here to enjoy myself. Won't you stop and play with me a little while?" The crocodile came out of the sea and sat on the shore, and the two played together for some time. Then the hare said, "Mr. Crocodile, you live in the sea and I live on this island, and we do not often meet, so I know very little about you. Tell me, do you think the number of your company is greater than mine?" "Of course, there are more crocodiles than hares," answered the crocodile. "Can you not see that for yourself? You live on this small island, while I live in the sea, which spreads through all parts of the world. So if I call together all the crocodiles who dwell in the sea, you hares will be nothing compared to us." The crocodile was very conceited. The hare, who meant to play a trick on the crocodile, said, "Do you think it possible for you to call up enough crocodiles to form a line from this island across the sea to Inaba?" The crocodile thought for a moment, and then answered, "Of course, it is possible." "Then do try," said the artful hare, "and I will count the number from here." The crocodile, who was very simple-minded, and who hadn't the least idea that the hare intended to play a trick on him, agreed to do what the hare asked, and said, "Wait a little, while I go back into the sea and call my company together." The crocodile plunged into the sea, and was gone for some time. The hare, meanwhile, waited patiently on the shore. At last the crocodile appeared, bringing with him a large number of other crocodiles. "Look, Mr. Hare," said the crocodile, "it is nothing for my friends to form a line between here and Inaba. There are enough crocodiles to stretch from here even as far as China or India. Did you ever see so many crocodiles?" Then the whole company of crocodiles arranged themselves in the water so as to form a bridge between the island of Oki and the mainland of Inaba. When the hare saw the bridge of crocodiles, he said, "How splendid! I did not believe this was possible. Now let me count you all. To do this, however, with your permission, I must walk over your backs to the other side. So please be so good as to not move, or else I shall fall into the sea and be drowned." So the hare hopped off the island onto the strange bridge of crocodiles, counting as he jumped from one crocodile's back to the other. "Please keep quite still, or I shall not be able to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Thus the cunning hare walked right across to the mainland of Inaba. Not content with getting his wish, he began to jeer at the crocodiles instead of thanking them, and said as he leapt off the last one's back, "Oh, you stupid crocodiles, now I'm done with you." And he was just about to run away as fast as he could, but he did not escape so easily, for as soon as the crocodiles understood that this was a trick, played upon them by the hare so as to enable him to cross the sea, and that the hare was now laughing at them for their stupidity. They became furiously angry and made up their minds to take revenge. So some of them ran after the hare and caught him. Then they all surrounded the poor little animal and pulled out all his fur. He cried out loudly and entreated them to spare him. But with each tuft of fur they pulled out, they said, "Serves you right." When the crocodiles had pulled out the last bit of fur, they threw the poor hare onto the beach, and they all swam away laughing at what they had done. The hare was now in a pitiful plight. All his beautiful white fur had been pulled out, and his bare little body was quivering with pain and bleeding all over. He could hardly move, and all he could do was lie on the beach quite helpless and weep over the misfortune that had befallen him. Notwithstanding that it was his own fault that had brought all this misery and suffering upon the white hare of Inaba, anyone seeing the poor little creature could not help feeling sorry for him in his sad condition, for the crocodiles had been very cruel in their revenge. Just at this time a number of men, who looked like king's sons, happened to pass by, and seeing the hare lying on the beach crying, stopped and asked what was the matter. The hare lifted up his head from between his paws and answered them, saying, "I had a fight with some crocodiles, but I was beaten, and they pulled out all my fur and left me to suffer here. That is why I am crying." Now one of these men had a bad and spiteful disposition, but he feigned kindness and said to the hare, "I feel very sorry for you. If you will only try it, I know of a remedy which will cure you of your sore body. Go and bathe yourself in the sea, and then come and sit in the wind. This will make your fur grow again, and you will be just as you were before." Then all the young men passed on, and the hare was very pleased, thinking that he found a cure. He went and bathed in the sea, and then came out and sat where the wind could blow upon him. But as the wind blew and dried him, his skin became drawn and hardened, and the salt increased the pain so much that he rolled onto the sand in his agony and cried aloud. But then another king's son passed by, carrying a great bag on his back. He saw the hare, and stopped, and asked why he was crying so loudly. But the poor hare, remembering that he had been deceived by one very like the man who now spoke to him, did not answer, but continued to cry. But this man had a kind heart, and looked at the hare very pityingly, and said, "You poor thing, I see that your fur is all pulled out, and that your skin is quite bare. Who can have treated you so cruelly?" When the hare heard these kind words, he felt very grateful to the man, and encouraged by his gentle manner, the hare told him all that had befallen him. The little animal hid nothing from his friend, but told him frankly how he had played a trick on the crocodiles, and now he had come across the bridge they had made, thinking that he wished to count their numbers, how he had jeered at them for their stupidity, and then how the crocodiles had revenged themselves on him. Then he went on to say how he had been deceived by a party of men, who looked very much like his kind friend, and the hare ended his long tale of woe by begging the man to give him some medicine that would cure him and make his fur grow again. When the hare had finished his story, the man was full of pity towards him, and said, "I am very sorry for all you have suffered, but remember, it was only the consequences of your deceit you practiced on the crocodiles." "I know," answered the sorrowful hare, "but I have repented and made up my mind to never use deceit again. So I beg you to show me how I may cure my sore body and make my fur grow again." "Then I will tell you a good remedy," said the man. "First go and bathe well in that pond over there, and try to wash all the salt from your body. Then pick some of those kaba flowers that are growing near the edge of the water, spread them on the ground, and roll yourself on them. If you do this, the pollen will cause your fur to grow again, and you will be quite well in a little while." The hare was very glad to be told what to do, so kindly. He crawled to the pond pointed out to him, bathed well in it, and then picked the kaba flowers growing near the water, and rolled himself on them. To his amazement, even while he was doing this, he saw his nice white fur growing again, the pain ceased, and he felt just as he had done before all his misfortunes. The hare was overjoyed at his quick recovery, and went hopping joyfully towards the young man who had so helped him, and kneeling down at his feet, said, "I cannot express my thanks for all you have done for me. It is my earnest wish to do something for you in return. Please tell me who you are." "I am no king's son, as you think me. I am a fairy, and my name is Okuni Nushi no Makoto," answered the man. "And those beings who passed here before me are my brothers. They have heard of a beautiful princess called Yakami, who lives in this province of Inaba, and they are on their way to find her and to ask her to marry one of them. But on this expedition, I am only an attendant, so I'm walking behind them with this great big bag on my back. The Hare humbled himself before this great fairy Okuni Nushi no Makoto, who many in that part of the land worshipped as a god. Oh, I did not know you were the Okuni Nushi no Makoto. How kind you have been to me. It is impossible to believe that unkind fellow who sent me to bathe in the sea is one of your brothers. I am quite sure that the princess, whom your brothers have gone to seek, will refuse to be the bride of any of them, and will prefer you for your goodness of heart. I am quite sure that you will win her heart without intending to do so, and she will ask you to be your bride. Okuni Nushi no Makoto took no notice of what the Hare said, but bidding the little animal goodbye, went on his way quickly and soon overtook his brothers. He found them just entering the princess's gate. Just as the Hare had said, the princess could not be persuaded to become the bride of any of the brothers. But when she looked at the kind brother's face, she went straight up to him and said, "To you I give myself." And so they were married. This is the end of the story. Okuni Nushi no Makoto is worshipped by the people in some parts of Japan as a god, and the Hare has become famous as the White Hare of Inaba. But what becomes of the crocodiles? Nobody knows. End of The White Hare and the Crocodiles in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
Master and Pupil, or the Devil Outwitted, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Phil Schempf. Master and Pupil, by Anonymous, from Georgian Folk Tales translated by Marjory Wardrop. Once upon a time there was a poor peasant who had one son, and it came to pass that his wife said to him, he should learn some trade, for when he is separated from thee, what will he do if he is left ignorant like thee? The wife importuned him, she gave him no rest, so the peasant took his child and went to seek a master for him. On the way they were thirsty. He saw a rivulet, drank eagerly till his thirst was quenched, and when he lifted up his head he cried out, "Ah, how good thou art!" On saying this there came forth from the water a devil in the form of a man, and said to the peasant, "What dost thou want, O man? I am Vahraka. What troubles thee?" The peasant told him all his story. The devil, when he learnt this, said, "Give me this son of thine. I will teach him for 1 year. Then come hither. If thou knowest him, it is well. He will go with thee. If not, he is mine, and mine alone. He shall be lost to thee." Now this devil had other children to bring up on the same conditions. And since in a year children change so much that their parents may no longer know them, the devil always had the best of it. The peasant knew nothing about this. He agreed to the proposal and went home. A year passed by, and the father of the child came to the devil. He did not find the devil at home. He saw in the courtyard a multitude of boys, and looked again and again, but could not recognize his boy. He was sad. However, his own son came up and knew him. Then the boy said, "Presently my instructor will come. He will turn us all into doves, and we shall fly away. In the flight I shall fly before all, and in the return I shall be behind all. And when my master asks thee which is thy son, thou wilt point to me." The peasant rejoiced and awaited the master with a hopeful heart. In a little while the master appeared. He called his pupils, turned them into doves, and ordered them to fly away. The peasant's son flew before all, and when they returned, remained behind. The master inquired, "Now, dost thou know which is thy son?" The peasant pointed him out. The devil was enraged when he perceived the trick his pupil had played him, but what did it matter? The boy left him. The father went and took his son with him. They came to a place where the nobles were hunting. Some greyhounds were pursuing a hare, but they could not catch it. The boy said to his father, "Go thou into the wood, raise a hare. I will turn into a hound, and I will seize it before the eyes of these nobles. The nobles will follow thee, and will be anxious to buy me, ask a high price, and sell me to them. Then I shall seize the first opportunity to escape, and overtake thee on the road." The father went into the wood and started a hare. His son turned into a hound, pursued the hare, and just before the eyes of the nobles he pounced on it. They crowded round the peasant and insisted on buying the dog. The peasant asked a high price, which they paid in exchange for the hound. The nobles attached a cord to the dog and went away. When they had travelled a little way along the road, a hare started from the thicket. They let the hound loose and sent him after it. When he had chased the hare a long way and had lost sight of the nobles, he changed again into a boy and followed his father. The father and the son went on their way. The money seemed inadequate. "I must get some more," said the son. They looked round. Another party of nobles were pursuing a pheasant. The falcons flew after it, but for some reason could not catch it. The boy changed himself into a falcon and sported with the pheasant in the air. Just before the nobles' eyes he brought it down. They were frantic with pleasure, and said to the peasant, "Thou must sell this falcon to us." The peasant again fixed a high price, to which the nobles agreed, and this they paid him in exchange for the falcon. The peasant went on his way. The nobles, after travelling some distance, sent the falcon in pursuit of another pheasant. The falcon flew after the bird, and when he was out of the noble's sight, changed into a boy and joined his father. The father and son went on with their money, but the son was not content with it. He said to his father, "Come, I will change into a splendid horse. Mount me, go into a town and sell me. But remember not to sell me to a man with variegated eyes. If thou dost, do not give him the bridle, for then thou knowest I shall not be able to free myself from his hands." On saying this, the boy changed into a splendid, spirited horse. His father mounted and rode into the town. Here he saw many who wanted to buy it, but more eager than any was a man with variegated eyes. Whenever one added a menethi (ruble) to the price, he added a thuman (10 rubles). Love of money conquered the peasant, and he sold the horse to the man with variegated eyes. He bought the bridle with it, mounted the horse, and spurred it on. He went, disappeared, and could no longer contain his joy that he had his pupil once more in his power. He reached home, shut the horse in a dark room, and locked the door. The pupil lay down and was sad. He thought and grieved, but there seemed to be no help for him. Time passed, and he could contrive no means of escape. One day he noticed that a sunbeam entered the stable through a hole. He changed himself into a mouse and ran out. His master saw him, however, and pursued him as a cat. The mouse ran, the cat followed. Just when the cat was about to seize him in his mouth, the mouse turned into a fish swimming in a stream. The master turned into a net and followed him. The fish swam away, but the net came after him. Just when the net was going to cover him, the fish changed into a pheasant and flew away. The master pursued him as a falcon. The pheasant flew on, and the falcon followed. When the falcon was about to put his claws into him, he turned into a red apple and rolled into the king's lap. The falcon changed into a knife in the king's hand. Just when the king was going to cut the apple, it changed into a kodi (80 pounds) of millet spread on a cloth. The devil changed himself into a brood hen and began to eat it. When it had eaten almost all and only left one grain, this grain turned into a needle and rolled in front of the hen, which changed into a thread in the eye of the needle. As it was about to hold back the needle ran into the fire and burned the thread. The boy thus escaped from the devil, went home to his father, and lived happily ever afterwards. End of Master and Pupil in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
Thor Fighting the Serpent in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Ashaya Reyes. Thor Fighting the Serpent by Mary H. Foster and Mabel H. Cummings. When Father Odin heard the blast of Heimdall's horn, he hastened to arm himself for the battle. Once again it is said that the Allfather sought wisdom at Mimir's fountain, asking to know how best to lead the Aesir against their enemies. But what Mimir said to him no one ever knew, for a second call sounded from the Gjallar horn, and the gods, with Odin at their head, rode forth from Asgard to meet their foes. Thor took his place beside Odin, but they were soon parted in the struggle. The thunder god fell upon his old enemy, the Serpent, whom twice before he had tried to slay, and after a fierce fight, he at last conquered and slew the monster. But the poisonous breath from the Serpent's mouth overcame the mighty Thor, and he also fell. Heimdall and Loki came face to face, and each slew the other. Thus every one of the gods battled each with his foe, till at last the darkness grew deeper, and all, both gods and giants, lay dead. Then fire burst forth, raging from Utgard to Asgard, and all the worlds were destroyed in that dreadful day of Ragnarok. But this was not the end of all. After many months and years and even centuries had passed, a new world began to appear, with the fair ocean and the beautiful land, with a bright, shining sun by day and the moon and stars by night. Then once more the light and heat from the sun made the grass and trees grow and the flowers bloom. Balder and Hoder came to this beautiful new world and walked and talked together. Thor's sons were there too, and with them the hammer Mjolnir, no longer for use against giants, but for helping men build homes. Two people, a man and a woman, who were kept safe through the raging fire, now came to dwell on the earth, and all their children and grandchildren lived at peace with each other in this beautiful new world. Balder and Hoder talked often of the old days when the Aesir dwelt in Asgard, before Loki, the wicked one, brought darkness and trouble to them. With loving words they spoke of Odin and Frigga, and brave Tyr, who gave his right hand to save the Aesir, of mighty Thor, and the faithful Heimdall, of lovely Freya and her beautiful necklace, and of fair Iduna's garden, and where they used to sit and eat her magic apples. But still they said, "We know now that this new world is fairer than the old, and here also the loving Allfather watches over his children." End of Thor Fighting the Serpent in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. Read by Ashaya Reyes, Naples, Florida, October 5th, 2021.
The Golden Age in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Ollie A.G. The Golden Age by James Baldwin. Jupiter and his mighty folk had not always dwelt amid the clouds on the mountain top. In times long past, a wonderful family called Titans had lived there and had ruled over all the world. There were 12 of them, 6 brothers and 6 sisters, and they said that their father was the sky and their mother the earth. They had the form and looks of men and women, but they were much larger and far more beautiful. The name of the youngest of these Titans was Saturn, and yet he was so very old that men often called him Father Time. He was the king of the Titans, and so of course, was the king of all the earth besides. Men were never so happy as they were during Saturn's reign. It was the true golden age then. The springtime lasted all the year. The woods and meadows were always full of blossoms, and the music of singing birds was heard every day and every hour. It was summer and autumn, too, at the same time. Apples and figs and oranges always hung ripe from the trees, and there were purple grapes on the vines, and melons and berries of every kind, which the people had but to pick and eat. Of course, nobody had to do any kind of work in that happy time. There was no such thing as sickness or sorrow or old age. Men and women lived for hundreds and hundreds of years and never became grey or wrinkled or lame, but were always handsome and young. They had no need of houses, for there were no cold days, nor storms, nor anything to make them afraid. Nobody was poor, for everybody had the same precious things: the sunlight, the pure air, the wholesome water of the springs, the grass for a carpet, the blue sky for a roof, the fruits and flowers of the woods and meadows. So, of course, no one was richer than another, and there was no money, nor any locks or bolts, for everybody was everybody's friend, and no man wanted to get more of anything than his neighbors had. When these happy people had lived long enough, they fell asleep, and their bodies were seen no more. They flitted away through the air, and over the mountains, and across the sea, to a flowery land in the distant west. And some men say that, even to this day, they are wandering happily hither and thither about the earth, causing babies to smile in their cradles, easing the burdens of the toil-worn and sick, and blessing mankind everywhere. What a pity it is that this golden age should have come to an end. But it was Jupiter and his brothers who brought about the sad change. It is hard to believe it, but men say that Jupiter was the son of the old Titan king, Saturn, and that he was hardly a year old when he began to plot how he might wage war against his father. As soon as he was grown up, he persuaded his brothers, Neptune and Pluto, and his sisters, Juno, Ceres, and Vesta, to join him, and they vowed that they would drive the Titans from the earth. Then followed a long and terrible war. But Jupiter had many mighty helpers. A company of one-eyed monsters called Cyclopes were kept busy all the time, forging thunderbolts in the fire of burning mountains. 3 other monsters, each with 100 hands, were called in to throw rocks and trees against the stronghold of the Titans, and Jupiter himself hurled his sharp lightning darts so thick and fast that the woods were set on fire and the water in the rivers boiled with the heat. Of course, good, quiet old Saturn and his brothers and sisters could not hold out always against such foes as these. At the end of 10 years they had to give up and beg for peace. They were bound in chains of the hardest rock and thrown into a prison in the lower worlds, and the Cyclopes and the 100-handed monsters were sent there to be their jailers and to keep guard over them forever. Then men began to grow dissatisfied with their lot. Some wanted to be rich and own all the good things in the world. Some wanted to be kings and rule over the others. Some who were strong wanted to make slaves of those who were weak. Some broke down the fruit trees in the woods, lest others should eat of the fruit. Some, for mere sport, hunted the timid animals which had always been their friends. Some even killed these poor creatures and ate their flesh for food. At last, instead of everybody being everybody's friend, everybody was everybody's foe. So, in all the world, instead of peace, there was war. Instead of plenty, there was starvation. Instead of innocence, there was crime. And instead of happiness, there was misery. And that was the way in which Jupiter made himself so mighty. And that was the way in which the Golden Age came to an end. End of The Golden Age in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
The Farmer and the Moneylender in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Farmer and the Moneylender. There was once a farmer who suffered much at the hands of a moneylender. Good harvests or bad, the farmer was always poor. The moneylender, rich. At last, when he hadn't a farthing left, farmer went to the moneylender's house and said, "You can't squeeze water from a stone, and as you have nothing to get by me, you might tell me the secret of becoming rich." "My friend," returned the moneylender piously, "riches come from Ram. Ask him." "Thank you, I will," replied the simple farmer. So he prepared 3 girdle cakes to last him on the journey and set out to find Ram. First he met Brahman, and to him he gave a cake, asking him to point out the road to Ram. But the Brahman only took the cake and went on his way without a word. Next the farmer met a jogi, or devotee, and to him he gave a cake, without receiving any help in return. At last he came upon a poor man sitting under a tree, and finding out he was hungry, the kindly farmer gave him his last cake, and sitting down to rest beside him, entered into a conversation. "And where are you going?" asked the poor man at length. "Oh, I have a long journey before me, for I am going to find Ram," replied the farmer. "I don't suppose you could tell me which way to go?" "Perhaps I can," said the poor man, smiling, "for I am Ram. What do you want of me?" Then the farmer told the whole story, and Ram, taking pity on him, gave him a conch shell, and showed him how to blow it in a particular way, saying, "Remember, whatever you wish for, you have only to blow the conch that way, and your wish will be fulfilled. Only have a care of that moneylender, for even magic is not proof against their wiles." The farmer went back to his village, rejoicing. In fact, the moneylender noticed his high spirits at once and said to himself, "Some good fortune must have befallen the stupid fellow to make him hold his head so jauntily." Therefore, he went over to the simple farmer's house and congratulated him on his good fortune, in such cunning words, pretending to have heard all about it, that before long the farmer found himself telling the whole story, all except the secret of blowing the conch. For with all his simplicity, the farmer was not quite such a fool as to tell that. Nevertheless, the moneylender determined to have the conch by hook or by crook, and as he was villain enough not to stick at trifles, he waited for a favourable opportunity and stole the conch. But after nearly bursting himself with blowing the conch in every conceivable way, he was obliged to give up the secret as a bad job. However, being determined to succeed, he went back to the farmer and said coolly, "Look here, I've got your conch, but I can't use it. You haven't got it, so it's clear you can't use it either. Business is at a standstill unless we make a bargain. Now, I promise to give you back your conch and never to interfere with your using it on one condition, which is this: whatever you get from it, I am to get double." "Never," cried the farmer. "That would be the old business all over again." "Not at all," replied the wily moneylender. "You will have your share. Now, don't be a dog in the manger, for if you get all you want, what can it matter to you if I am rich or poor?" At last, though it went sorely against the grain to be of any benefit to a moneylender, the farmer was forced to yield, and from that time, no matter what he gained by the power of the conch, the moneylender gained double. And the knowledge that this was so preyed upon the farmer's mind day and night, so that he had no satisfaction out of anything. At last there came a very dry season, so dry that the farmer's crops withered for want of rain. Then he blew his conch, and wished for a well to water them. And lo, there was the well. But the moneylender had two beautiful new wells. This was too much for any farmer to stand. And our friend brooded over it, and brooded over it, till at last a bright idea came into his head. He seized the conch, blew it loudly, and cried out, "O Ram, I wish to be blind of one eye." And so he was, in a twinkling. But the moneylender, of course, was blind of both, and in trying to steer his way between the two new wells, he fell into one and was drowned. Now, this true story shows that a farmer once got the better of a moneylender, but only by losing one of his eyes. End of The Farmer and the Moneylender in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. How Sun, Moon and Wind Went Out to Dinner in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. One day, Sun, Moon and Wind went out to dine with their uncle and aunts Thunder and Lightning. Their mother, one of the most distant stars you see far up in the sky, waited alone for her children's return. Now both Sun and Wind were greedy and selfish. They enjoyed the great feast that had been prepared for them, without a thought of saving any of it to take home to their mother. But the gentle Moon did not forget her. Of every dainty dish that was brought round, she placed a small portion under one of her beautiful long fingernails, that Star might also have a share in the treat. On their return, their mother, who had kept watch for them all night long, with her little bright eye, said, "Well, children, what have you brought home for me?" Then Sun, who was eldest, said, "I have brought nothing home for you. I went out to enjoy myself with my friends, not to fetch a dinner for my mother." And Wind said, "Neither have I brought anything home for you, mother. You could hardly expect me to bring a collection of good things for you, when I merely went out for my own pleasure." But Moon said, "Mother, fetch a plate. See what I have brought you." And shaking her hands, she showered down such a choice dinner as never was seen before. Then Star turned to Sun and spoke thus, "Because you went out to amuse yourself with your friends, and feasted and enjoyed yourself, without any thought of your mother at home, you shall be cursed. Henceforth your rays shall ever be hot and scorching, and shall burn all that they touch. And men shall hate you, and cover their heads when you appear. And that is why the sun is so hot to this day." Then she turned to Wind and said, "You also, who forgot your mother in the midst of your selfish pleasures, hear your doom. You shall always blow in the hot, dry weather, and shall parch and shrivel all living things. And men shall detest and avoid you from this very time. And that is why the wind in hot weather is still so disagreeable." But to Moon she said, "Daughter, because you remembered your mother, and kept for her a share in your own enjoyment, from henceforth you shall be ever cool, and calm, and bright. No noxious glare shall accompany your pure rays, and men shall always call you blessed. And that is why the moon's light is so soft and cool and beautiful even to this day." End of How Sun, Moon and Wind Went Out to Dinner in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
Beira, Queen of Winter in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Amanda Chandler. Beira, Queen of Winter by Donald A. Mackenzie. Dark Beira was the mother of all the gods and goddesses in Scotland. She was of great height and very old, and everyone feared her. When roused to anger, she was as fierce as the biting north wind and harsh as the tempest-stricken sea. Each winter she reigned as queen of the 4 red divisions of the world, and none disputed her sway. But when the sweet spring season drew nigh, her subjects began to rebel against her, and to long for the coming of the summer king, Angus of the white steed, and Breed, his beautiful queen, who were loved by all, for they were the bringers of plenty and of bright and happy days. It enraged Beira greatly to find her power passing away, and she tried her utmost to prolong the winter season by raising spring storms and sending blighting frosts to kill early flowers and keep the grass from growing. Beira lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. The reason she did not die of old age was because, at the beginning of every spring, she drank the magic waters of the Well of Youth, which bubbles up in the greened island of the west. This was a floating island where summer was the only season, and the trees were always bright with blossom and laden with fruit. It drifted about on the silver tides of the blue Atlantic, and sometimes appeared off the western coast of Ireland, and sometimes close to the Hebrides. Many bold mariners have steered their galleys up and down the ocean, searching for Green Island in vain. On a calm morning they might sail past its shores, and yet never know it was near at hand, for ofttimes it lay hidden in a twinkling mist. Men have caught glimpses of it from the shore, but while they gazed on its beauties with eyes of wonder, it vanished suddenly from sight by sinking beneath the waves like the setting sun. Beira, however, always knew where to find Green Island when the time came for her to visit it. The waters of the Well of Youth are most potent when the days begin to grow longer, and most potent of all on the first of the lengthening days of spring. Beira always visited the island on the night before the first lengthening day, that is, on the last night of her reign as Queen of Winter. All alone in the darkness, she sat beside the Well of Youth, waiting for the dawn. When the first faint beam of light appeared in the eastern sky, she drank the water as it bubbled fresh from a crevice in the rock. It was necessary that she should drink of this magic water before any bird visited the well, and before any dog barked. If a bird drank first, or a dog barked ere she began to drink, dark old Beira would crumble into dust. As soon as Beira tasted the magic water, in silence and alone, she began to grow young again. She left the island and, returning to Scotland, fell into a magic sleep. When at length she awoke, in bright sunshine, she rose up as a beautiful girl with long hair yellow as buds of broom, cheeks red as rowan berries, and blue eyes that sparkled like the summer sea in sunshine. Then she went to and fro through Scotland, clad in a robe of green and crowned with a chaplet of bright flowers of many hues. No fairer goddess was to be found in all the land, save Breed, the peerless queen of summer. As each month went past, however, Beira aged quickly. She reached full womanhood in midsummer, and when autumn came on, her brows wrinkled and her beauty began to fade. When the season of winter returned once again, she became an old and withered hag and began to reign as the fierce Queen Beira. Often on stormy nights in early winter, she wandered about, singing this sorrowful song. O life that ebbs like the sea, I am weary and old, I am weary and old. Oh, how can I happy be, all alone in the dark and the cold? I'm the old Beira again. My mantle no longer is green. I think of my beauty with pain, and the days when another was queen. My arms are withered and thin. My hair once golden is gray. 'Tis winter, my reign doth begin. Youth's summer has faded away. Youth's summer and autumn have fled. I am weary and old. I am weary and old. Every flower must fade and fall dead when the winds blow cold, when the winds blow cold. The aged Beira was fearsome to look upon. She had only one eye, but the sight of it was keen and sharp as ice, and as swift as the mackerel of the ocean. Her complexion was a dull, dark blue, and this is how she sang about it. Why is my face so dark, so dark, so dark, oh ho, so dark, oh he? Out in all weathers I wander alone, in the mire, in the cold, ah me. Her teeth were red as rust, and her locks, which lay heavily on her shoulders, were white as an aspen covered with hoar-frost. On her head she wore a spotted mutch. All her clothing was gray, and she was never seen without her great dun-colored shawl, which was drawn closely round her shoulders. It is told, in the days when the world was young, Beira saw land where there is now water, and water where there is now land. Once a wizard spoke to her and said, "Tell me your age, O sharp old woman." Beira answered, "I have long ceased to count the years, but I shall tell you what I have seen. Yonder is the seal-haunted rock of Skerryvor in the midst of the sea. I remember when it was a mountain surrounded by fields. I saw the fields plowed, and the barley that grew upon them was sharp and juicy. Yonder is a loch. I remember when it was a small round well. In these days I was a fair young girl, and now I am very old and frail and dark and miserable." It is also told that Beira let loose many rivers and formed many lochs, sometimes willingly and sometimes against her will, and that she also shaped many bens and glens. All the hills in Rossshire are said to have been made by Beira. There was once a well on Ben Cruachan in Argyll, from which Beira drew water daily. Each morning at sunrise, she lifted off the slab that covered it, and each evening at sunset, she laid it above the well again. It happened that one evening she forgot to cover the well. Then the proper order of things was disturbed. As soon as the sun went down, the water rose in great volume and streamed down the mountainside, roaring like a tempest-swollen sea. When day dawned, Beira found that the valley beneath was filled with water. It was in this way that Loch Awe came to be. Beira had another well in Inverness Shire, which had to be kept covered in a like manner, from sunset till sunrise. One of her maids, whose name was Nessa, had charge of the well. It happened that one evening the maid was late in going to the well to cover it. When she drew near, she beheld the water flowing so fast from it that she turned away and ran for her life. Beira watched her from the top of Ben Nevis, which was her mountain throne, and cried, "You have neglected your duty. Now you will run forever and never leave water." The maiden was at once changed into a river, and the loch and the river which runs from it towards the sea were named after her. That is why the loch is called Loch Ness, and the river Ness. Once a year, when the night on which she was transformed comes round, Nessa, arises out of the river in her girl form and sings a sad, sweet song in the pale moonlight. It is said that her voice is clearer and more beautiful than that of any bird, and her music more melodious than the golden harps and silvern pipes of fairyland. In the days when rivers broke loose and lochs were made, Beira set herself to build the mountains of Scotland. When at work, she carried on her back a great creel filled with rocks and earth. Sometimes, as she leapt from hill to hill, her creel tilted sideways, and rocks and earth fell from it into lochs and formed islands. Many islands are spoken of as spillings from the creel of the big old woman. Beira had 8 hags who were her servants. They also carried creels, and one after the other they emptied out their creels until a mountain was piled up nigh to the clouds. One of the reasons why Beira made the mountains was to use them as stepping stones. Another was to provide houses for her giant sons. Many of her sons were very quarrelsome. They fought continually one against another. To punish those of them who disobeyed her, Beira shut the offenders up in mountain houses, and from these they could not escape without her permission. But this did not keep them from fighting. Every morning they climbed to the tops of their mountain houses and threw great boulders at one another. That is why so many big gray boulders now lie on steep slopes and are scattered through the valleys. Other giant sons of Beira dwelt in deep caves. Some were horned like deer, and others had many heads. So strong were they that they could pick up cattle and, throwing them over their shoulders, carry them away to roast them for their meals. Each giant son of Beira was called a fuar. It was Beira who built Ben Wyvis. She found it a hard task, for she had to do all the work alone, her hag servants being busy elsewhere. One day, when she had grown very weary, she stumbled and upset her creel. All the rocks and earth it contained fell out in a heap and formed the mountain which is called Little Wyvis. The only tool that Beira used was a magic hammer. When she struck it lightly on the ground, the soil became as hard as iron. When she struck it heavily on the ground, a valley was formed. After she had built up a mountain, she gave it its special form by splintering the rocks with her hammer. If she had made all the hills of the same shape, she would not have been able to recognize one from another. After the mountains were all formed, Beira took great delight in wandering between them and over them. She was always followed by wild animals. The foxes barked with delight when they beheld her. Wolves howled to greet her, and eagles shrieked with joy in mid-air. Beira had great herds and flocks to which she gave her protection. Nimble-footed deer, high-horned cattle, shaggy gray goats, black swine, and sheep that had snow-white fleeces. She charmed her deer against the huntsmen, and when she visited a deer forest, she helped them to escape from the hunters. During early winter, she milked the hinds on the tops of mountains. But when the winds rose so high that the froth was blown from the milking pails, she drove the hinds down to the valleys. The froth was frozen on the crests of high hills and lay there, snow-white and beautiful. When the winter torrents began to pour down the mountainsides, leaping from ledge to ledge, the people said, Beira is milking her shaggy goats, and streams of milk are pouring down over high rocks. Beira washed her great shawl in the sea, for there was no lake big enough for the purpose. The part she chose for her washing is the strait between the western islands of Jura and Skarba. Beira's washing pot is the whirlpool there called Corrivrecken. It was so named because the son of a Scottish king named Brecon was drowned in it, his boat having been upset by the waves raised by Beira. 3 days before the Queen of Winter began her work, her hag servants made ready the water for her, and the quarry could then be heard snorting and fuming for 20 miles around. On the 4th day, Beira threw her shawl into the whirlpool and tramped it with her feet until the edge of the quarry overflowed with foam. When she had finished her washing, she laid her shawl on the mountains to dry, and as soon as she lifted it up, all the mountains of Scotland were white with snow, to signify that the great queen had begun her reign. Now, the meaning of this story is that Beira is the spirit of winter. She grows older and fiercer as the weeks go past, until at length her strength is spent. Then she renews her youth, so that she may live through the summer and autumn, and begin to reign once again. The ancient people of Scotland saw that during early winter, torrents poured down from the hills, and in this Beira fable, they expressed their belief that the torrents were let loose by the Winter Queen, and that the lochs were, at the beginning, formed by the torrents that sprang from magic wells. They saw great boulders lying on hillsides and in valleys, and accounted for their presence in these places by telling how they were flung from mountaintops by the giant sons of Beira. End of Beira, Queen of Winter, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
The Lord, St. Peter, and the Apostles in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Paula Messina. The Lord, St. Peter, and the Apostles by Thomas Frederick Crane. Once, while the Master was on a journey with the 13 apostles, they came to a village where there was no bread. The Master said, "Peter, let each one of you carry a stone." They each took up a stone, St. Peter a little bit of a one. The others were all loaded down, but St. Peter went along very easily. The Master said, "Now let us go to another village. If there is any bread there, we shall buy it. If there is none, I will give you my blessing, and the stones will become bread." They went to another town, put the stones down, and rested. The Master gave them his blessing, and the stones became bread. St. Peter, who had carried a little one, felt his heart grow faint. "Master," he said, "how am I going to eat?" My brother, why did you carry a little stone? The others, who loaded themselves down, have bread enough." Then they went on, and the Master made them each carry another stone. St. Peter was cunning this time, and took a large one, and all the others carried small ones. The Lord said to the others, "Little ones, we will have a laugh at Peter's expense." They arrived at another village, and all the apostles threw away their stones because there was bread there. And St. Peter was bent double, for he had carried a paving stone with him to no purpose. On their journey, they met a man, and as St. Peter was in advance of the others, he said, "The Lord is coming shortly. Ask him a favor for your soul." The man drew near and said, Lord, my father is ill with old age. Cure him, master. The Lord said, Am I a physician? Do you know what you must do? Put him in a hot oven, and your father will become a boy again. They did so, and his father became a little boy. The idea pleased St. Peter, and when he found himself alone, he went about seeking to make some old man young. By chance, there met him one who was seeking the master because his mother was at the point of death, and he wanted her cured. St. Peter said, What do you want? I want the master, for I have an old mother who is very ill, and the master alone can cure her. Fortunately, Peter is here. Do you know what you must do? Heat an oven and put her in it, and she will be cured. The poor man believed him, for he knew that the Lord loved St. Peter. So he went home and immediately put his mother in the hot oven. What more could you expect? The old woman was burnt to a coal. Ah, santo di ca e di da, cried the son. That scurvy fellow has made me kill my mother. He hastened to St. Peter. The master was present, and when he heard the story, could not control his laughter, and said, Ah, Peter, what have you done? St. Peter tried to excuse himself, but the poor man kept crying for his mother. What must the master do? He had to go to the house of the dead, and with the blessing which he there pronounced, he brought the old woman to life again, a beautiful young girl, and relieved St. Peter of his great embarrassment. End of story. The Lord, St. Peter, and the Apostles in Myths, Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
Horned Toad and Giants in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Celia Ajibu. Horned Toad and Giants by Charles M. Skinner. The McKees have a legend that long ago, when the principal mesa that they occupy was higher than it is now, and when they owned all the country from the mountains to the great river, giants came out of the west and troubled them, going so far as to dine on McKees. It was hard to get away, for the monsters could see all over the country from the tops of the mesa. The king of the tribe offered the handsomest woman in his country and 1,000 horses to any man who would deliver his people from these giants. This king was eaten like the rest, and the citizens declined to elect another, because they were beginning to lose faith in kings. Still, there was one young brave whose single thought was how to defeat the giants and save his people. As he was walking down the mesa, he saw a lizard, of the kind commonly known as a horned toad, lying under a rock in pain. He rolled away the stone and was passing on, when a voice, that seemed to come out of the earth, but that really came from the toad, asked if he wished to destroy the giants. He desired nothing so much. Then take my horned crest for a helmet. Lalomi, that was the name of him, did as he bid, and found that in a moment the crest had swelled and covered his head so thickly that no club could break through it. Now take my breastplate, continued the toad, and though it would not have covered the Indian's thumbnail, when he put it on it so increased in bulk that it corseted his body and no arrow could pierce it. Now take the scales from my eyes, commanded the toad, and when he had done so, Lalomi felt as light as a feather. Go up and wait. When you see a giant, go toward him, looking in his eyes, and he will walk backward. Walk around him until he has his back to a precipice. Then advance. He will back away until he reaches the edge of a mesa, when he will fall off and be killed. Lalomi obeyed these instructions, for presently a giant loomed in the distance and came striding across the plains 1/2 mile at a step. As he drew near, he flung a spear, but it glanced from the Indian's armor like hail from a rock. Then an arrow followed and was turned. At this point the giant lost courage, for he fancied that Lolomi was a spirit. Fearing a blow if he turned, he kept his face toward Lolomi, who maneuvered so skillfully that when he had the giant's back to the edge of the cliff, he sprang at him, and the giant, with a yell of alarm, fell and broke his bones on the rocks below. So Lolomi killed many giants, because they all walked back before him, and after they had fallen, the people heaped rocks on their bodies. To this day, this place is known as the Giant's Fall. Then the tribe made Lolomi king and gave him the most beautiful damsel for his wife. As he was the best king they ever had, they treasured his memory after he was dead, and used his name as a term of greeting, so that Lolomi is a word of welcome, and will continue to be until the giants come again. End of Horned Toads and Giants in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
The Raven Myth in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Steve Knox, The Raven Myth, Bering Straits Eskimo Tradition, edited by Katharine Judson. The Raven Myth. It was in the time when there were no people on the earth plane. The first man, for 4 days, lay coiled up in the pod of the beach pea. On the 5th day, he stretched out his feet and burst the pod. He fell to the ground, and when he stood up, he was a full-grown man. Man looked all around him, and then at himself. He moved his hands and arms, his neck and legs. When he looked back, he saw, still hanging to the vine, the pod of the beach pea, with a hole in the lower end out of which he had dropped. When he looked about him again, he saw that he was getting farther from his starting place. The ground seemed to move up and down under his feet, and it was very soft. After a while, he had a strange feeling in his stomach, so he stooped down to drink some water from a small pool at his feet. Then he felt better. When man looked up again, he saw coming toward him, with a fluttering motion, something dark. He watched the dark thing until it stopped just in front of him. It was Raven. As soon as Raven stopped, he raised one of his wings and pushed up his beak, as though it were a mask, to the top of his head. Thus, Raven changed at once into a man. Raven stared hard at the man, moving from side to side to see him better. Raven said, "What are you? Where did you come from? I have never seen anything like you." Raven still stared at man, surprised to find this new thing so much like himself. He made man walk around a little while he perked his head from side to side to see him better. "Where did you come from? I have never seen anything like you before." Man said, "I came from the pea pod." He pointed to the plant from which he came. "Ah, I made that vine," said Raven, "but I did not know that anything like you would come from it. Come with me to the high ground over there. It is thicker and harder. This ground I made later, and it is soft and thin." So Man and Raven walked to the higher ground, which was firm and hard. Raven asked Man if he had eaten anything. Man said he had taken some of the soft stuff from one of the pools. "Ah, you drank some water," said Raven. "Now wait for me here." Raven drew down his beak as though it were a mask over his face. He at once became a bird and flew far up into the sky, far out of sight. Man waited until the 4th day. Then Raven returned, bringing him 4 berries in his claws. He pushed up his beak and so became a man again. Then he gave to Man 2 salmon berries, 2 heath berries, saying, "Here is something I made for you to eat. I wish them to be plentiful on the earth. Eat them." Man put the berries into his mouth, one after the other, and ate them. Then he felt better. Then Raven left Man near a small creek while he went to the edge of the water. He took 2 pieces of clay at the water's edge and shaped them like a pair of mountain sheep. He held them in his hand until they were dry, and then he called Man to come and see them. Man said they were pretty, so Raven told him to close his eyes. Man closed his eyes tightly. Then Raven pulled down his beak mask and waved his wings 4 times over the pieces of clay. At once they bounded away as full-grown mountain sheep. Raven told Man to look. Man was so pleased that Raven said, If these animals are plentiful, perhaps people will try to kill them. Man said, yes. Then Raven said, well, it will be better for them to live among the steep rocks so everyone cannot kill them. There only shall they be found. Raven took 2 more pieces of clay and shaped them like tame reindeer. He held them in his hand until they were partly dry, then told Man to look at them. Raven again drew down his beak mask and waved his wings 4 times over them. Thus they became alive, but as they were only dry in spots while Raven held them, therefore they remained brown and white with mottled coat. Raven told Man these tame reindeer would be very few in number. Again, Raven took 2 pieces of clay and shaped them like the caribou or wild reindeer. But he held them in his hands only a little while, so that only the bellies of the reindeer became dry and white. Then Raven drew down his beak mask and waved his wings over them, and they bounded away. But because only their bellies were dry and white, while Raven held them, therefore the wild reindeer is brown, except its white belly. Raven said to Man, these animals will be very common. People will kill many of them. Thus Raven began to create the animals. Raven said one day to Man, you are lonely by yourself. I will make you a companion. He went to some white clay at a spot distant from the clay of which he had made animals, and made of the clay a figure almost like Man. Raven kept looking at Man while he shaped the figure. Then he took fine water grass from the creek and fastened it on the back of the head for hair. When the clay was shaped, Raven drew down his beak mask and waved his wings over it. The clay became a beautiful girl. The girl was white and fair because Raven let the clay dry entirely before he waved his wings over it. Raven took the girl to Man. There is a companion for you, he said. Now in the days of the first people on the earth plane, there were no mountains far or near. No rain ever fell, and there were no winds. The sun shone always very brightly. Then Raven showed the first people on the earth plane how to sleep warmly in the dry moss when they were tired. Raven himself drew down his beak mask and went to sleep like a bird. When Raven awakened, he went back to the creek. Here he made 2 sticklebacks, 2 graylings, and 2 blackfish. When these were swimming about in the water, he called Man to see them. Man raised his hand in surprise, and the sticklebacks darted away. Raven told him the graylings would be found in clear mountain streams, while the sticklebacks would live along the coast, and that both would be good for food. Raven next made the shrew mouse. He said the shrew mouse will not be good for food. It will prevent the earth plane from looking bare and cheerless. In this way, Raven was busy several days, making birds and fishes and animals. He showed each of them to Man and explained what they were good for. Then Raven flew into the sky, far, far away, and was gone 4 days. When he came back, he brought a salmon to Man. But Raven noticed that the ponds and lakes were silent and lonely, so he made water bugs to flit upon the surface of the water. He also made the beaver and the muskrat to live around the borders of the ponds. Raven told Man that the beavers would live along the streams and build strong houses, so Man must build a strong house also. Raven said the beavers would be very cunning, and only good hunters could catch them. He also told Man how to catch the muskrat and how to use its skin for clothing. Raven also made flies and mosquitoes and other insects to make the earth plane more cheerful. At first, mosquitoes were like flies. They did not bite. One day, Man killed a deer. After he had cut it up and placed the fat on a bush, he fell asleep. When he awoke, he found the mosquitoes had eaten all of it. Then Man was very angry and scolded the mosquitoes. He said, "Never eat meat again. Eat men." Before that, mosquitoes never bit people. When the first baby came on the earth plane, Raven rubbed it all over with white clay. He told Man it would grow into a man like himself. The next morning, the baby was a big boy. He ran around pulling up grass and flowers that Raven had planted. By the 3rd day, the baby was a full-grown man. Then another baby was born on the earth plane. She was rubbed over with the white clay. The next day, the baby was a big girl walking around. On the 3rd day, she was a full-grown woman. Now Raven began to be afraid that men would kill all the creatures he had made. He was afraid they would kill them for food and clothing. Therefore Raven went to a creek nearby. He took white clay and shaped it like a bear. Then he waved his wings over it, and the clay became a bear. But Raven jumped very quickly to one side when the bear became alive because it looked fiercely around and growled. Then Raven showed the bear to Man and told him to be careful. He said the bear was very fierce and would tear him to pieces if he disturbed it. The Raven made the seals and taught Man how to catch them. He also taught Man how to make strong lines from sealskin and snares for the deer. Then Raven went away to the place of the pea vine. When he reached the pea vine, he found 3 other men had just fallen from the same pod that Man had fallen from. These men were looking about them in wonder. Raven led them away from the pea vine, but in a different direction from the first man. He brought them close to the sea. Raven stayed with these 3 men a long time. He taught them how to take wood from the bushes and small trees he planted in hollows and sheltered places, and to make a fire drill, and also a bow. He made many more plants and birds which liked the seacoast, but he did not make so many as in the land where Man lived. He taught these men how to make bows and arrows, spears and nets, and how to use them, and also how to capture the seals, which were now plentiful in the sea. Then he taught them how to make kayaks, and how to build houses of drift logs and of bushes covered with earth. Then he made wives for these men and went back to Man. When Raven reached the land where Man lived, he thought the earth plain still looked bare. So while the others slept, Raven planted birch and spruce and cottonwood trees to grow in the low places. Then he woke up the people who were pleased with the trees. The Raven taught Man how to make fire with the fire drill, and to place the spark of tinder in a bunch of dry grass, and to wave it about until it blazed, and then to put dry wood upon it. He showed them how to roast fish on a stick, and how to make fish traps of splints and willow bark, and how to dry salmon for winter use. Where Man lived, there was now a large village because the people did everything as Raven told them, and therefore all the babies grew up in 3 days. One day, Raven came back and sat down by Man, by the creek, and they talked of many things. Man asked Raven about the skyland. Man wanted to see the skyland which Raven had made. Therefore, Raven took Man to the land in the sky. Man found that the skyland was a very beautiful country, and that it had much better climate than his land. But the people who lived there were very small. Their heads did not reach to Man's hips. The people wore fur clothing with beautiful patterns, such as people on earth now wear, because Man showed his people how to make them. In the lakes were strange animals, which would have killed Man if he had tried to drink of the water. In a dry lake bed, thickly covered with tall grass, Man saw a wonderful animal resting upon the tips of the grasses. It had a long head and 6 legs. It had fine, thick hair, and on the back of the head were 2 thick, short horns which bent forward and then curved back at the tips. Raven told Man it took many people to kill this animal. Then they came to a round hole in the sky, and around the edge of the hole was short grass, glowing like fire. Raven said, "This is the star called the moon dog." Some of the grass had been pulled up. Raven said he had taken some to start the first fire on earth. Then Raven said to Man, "Shut your eyes. I will take you to another country." Man climbed upon Raven's back, and they dropped down through the star hole. They floated a long, long time through the air. Then they floated through something else. When they stopped, Raven saw he was at the bottom of the sea. Man could breathe there, but it seemed foggy. Raven said that was the appearance of the water. Then Raven said, "I want to make some new animals here, but you must not walk about. You lie down, and if you get tired, turn over on the other side." Man went to sleep lying on one side and slept a long while. When he waked, he wanted to turn over, but he could not. The man thought, "I wish I could turn over," and at once he turned. As he turned, he was surprised to see that his body was covered with long white hairs, and his fingers were long claws. Then he went to sleep again. This he did 3 times more. Then, when he woke up, Raven stood by him. Raven said, "I have changed you into a white bear. How do you like it?" Man could not make a sound until Raven waved his wings over him. Then he said he did not like it. If he was a bear, he would have to live on the sea, while his son lived on land. So Man should feel badly. Then Raven struck the white skin with his wings, and it fell off, so Man became himself again. But Raven took the empty bear skin and placed one of his own tail feathers inside it for a spine. Then he waved his wing over it, and a white bear arose. Ever since then, white bears have been found on the frozen sea. Raven said, "How many times did you turn over?" Man said, 4. Raven said, "You slept just 4 years." Then Raven made other animals. He made the amikuk, a large slimy animal with thick skin and with 4 long, wide-spreading arms. This is a fierce animal and lives in the sea. It wraps its 4 long arms around a man or a kayak and drags it under the water. A man cannot escape it. If he climbs out of his kayak on the ice, the amikuk will dart underneath and break the ice. If man runs away on shore, the amikuk pursues him by burrowing through the earth. No man can escape from it once it pursues him. The raven showed man the walrus, and the dog walrus, with head and teeth like a dog. It always swam with large herds of walrus, and with a stroke of its tail it could kill a man. He showed him whales and the grampus. Raven told man that only good hunters could kill a whale, but when one was killed, an entire village could feast on it. He showed him also the sea fox, which is so fierce it kills men, and the sea otter, which is like the land otter but has finer fur tipped with white, and other fishes and animals as they rose to the surface of the water. Then Raven said, "Close your eyes, hold fast to me." The man found himself on the shore near his home. The village was very large. His wife was very old, and his son was an old man. The people gave him place of honor in the kashim and made him their headsman. So man taught the young men many things. Now man wanted again to see the skyland. So Raven and man went up among the dwarf people and lived there a long time. But on earth the village grew very large. The men killed many animals. Now in those days the sun shone always very brightly. No rain ever fell, and no winds blew. Man and Raven were angry because the people killed many animals. They took a long line and a grass basket one night and caught 10 reindeer, which they put into the basket. Now in those days, reindeer had sharp teeth like dogs. The next night, Raven took the reindeer and let them down on earth close to man's village. Raven said, "Break down the first house you see and kill the people. Men are becoming too many." The reindeer did as Raven commanded. They stamped on the house and broke it down. They ate up the people with their sharp wolf-like teeth. The next night, Raven let the reindeer down. Again, they broke down a house and ate up the people with their sharp teeth. The village people were much frightened. The third night, they covered the third house with a mixture of deer fat and berries. On the third night, when the reindeer began to tear down the house, their mouths were filled with the fat and sour berries. Then the reindeer ran away, shaking their heads so violently that all their long, sharp teeth fell out. Ever since then, reindeer have had small teeth and cannot harm people. After the reindeer ran away, Raven and man returned to the skyland. Man said, "If the people do not stop killing so many animals, they will kill everything you have made. It would be better to take the sun away from them. Then it will be dark and people will die." Raven said, "That is right. You stay here. I will go and take away the sun." So Raven went away and took the sun out of the sky. He put it in a skin bag and carried it far away to a distant part of the skyland. Then it became dark on earth. The people on earth were frightened when the sun vanished. They offered Raven presents of food and furs if he would bring back the sun. Raven said no. After a while, Raven felt sorry for them, so he let them have a little light. He held up the sun in one hand for 2 days so people could hunt and secure food. Then he put the sun in the skin bag again, and the earth was dark. Then after a long time, when the people made many gifts, he would let them have a little light again. Now, Raven had a brother living in the village. He was sorry for the earth people, so Raven's brother thought a long time. Then he died. The people put him in a grave box and had a burial feast. Then they left the grave box. At once, Raven's brother slipped out of the box and went away from the village. He hid his raven mask and coat in a tree. Soon, Raven's wife came for water. When she took up a dipper full to drink, Raven's brother, by magic, became a small leaf. He fell into the water, and Raven's wife swallowed him. When Raven Boy was born, he grew very rapidly. He was running about when he was only a few days old. He cried for the sun which was in the skin bag hanging on the rafters. Raven was fond of the boy, so he let him play with the sun. Yet he was afraid Raven Boy would lose the sun, so he watched him. When Raven Boy began to play out of doors, He cried and begged for the sun. Raven said no. Then Raven Boy cried more than ever. At last, Raven gave him the sun in the house. Raven Boy played with it a long while. When no one was looking, he ran quickly out of the house. He ran to the tree, put on his raven mask and coat, and flew far away with the sun in the skin bag. When Raven Boy was far up in the sky, he heard Raven call, "Do not hide the sun. Let it out of the bag. Do not keep it always dark." Raven thought the boy had stolen it for himself. Raven Boy flew to the place where the sun belonged. He tore off the skin covering and put the sun in its place. Then he saw a broad path leading far away. He followed it to the side of a hole fringed with short, bright grass. He remembered that Raven had said, "Do not keep it always dark." Therefore he made the sky turn, with all the stars and the sun. Thus it is now sometimes dark and sometimes light. Raven Boy picked up some of the short, bright grass by the edge of the sky hole and stuck it into the sky. This is the morning star. Raven Boy went down to the earth. The people were glad to see him. They said, "What has become of man who went into the skyland with Raven?" Now this was the first time that Raven Boy had heard of man. He started to fly up into the sky, but he could get only a small distance above the earth. When he found he could not get back to the sky, Raven Boy wandered to the second village, where lived the men who had come from the pod of the beech pea. Raven Boy there married a wife, and he had many children. But the children could not fly to the sky. They had lost the magic power. Therefore the ravens now flutter over the tundras like other birds. End of the Raven Myth in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. Raven's Marriage in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Steve Knox, Raven's Marriage, Bering Straits Eskimo Tradition, edited by Katharine Judson. Raven's Marriage. After Raven had lived alone a long while, he decided to get married. It was late in the fall, and the birds were flying southward. So Raven flew away in the path of the geese and birds on their way to Summerland. Raven stopped directly in the path. Soon, Raven saw a young goose coming near. He looked down at his feet and called, "Who will marry me? I'm a very nice man." The goose flew on. Soon, a black brant passed. Raven looked down at his feet and called, "Who will marry me? I am a very nice man." The black brant flew on. Raven looked after her. He said, "What kind of people are these? They do not even stop to listen." A duck came near. Raven hid his face and called, "Who will marry me? I am a very nice man." The duck looked toward him and then flew on. Raven said, "Ah, I came very near it then. I shall succeed this time." Soon, a whole family of white front geese came along. There were parents, 4 brothers, and a sister. Raven called out, "Who wants to marry me? I am a fine hunter. I am young and handsome." The geese alighted just beyond him. Raven thought, "Now I will get a wife." Raven saw near him a pretty white stone with a hole in it. He picked it up, strung it on a long grass stem, and hung it about his neck. Then he pushed up his beak so that it slid to the top of his head like a mask. So he became a dark-colored young man. Then he walked up to the geese. Each of the geese pushed up its bill in the same manner. They became nice-looking people. Raven liked the girl. He gave her the stone, thus choosing her for his wife, and she hung it about her neck. Then all pushed down their bills again and became birds, so they flew south toward the Summerland. The geese flapped their wings heavily and flew slowly. Raven, on outspread wing, glided on ahead. The geese looked after him, saying, "How light and graceful he is." When Raven became tired, he said, "We had better stop early and look for a place to sleep." Soon they were all asleep. The next morning, the geese were awake early. They wanted to be off. Raven was sound asleep. Father Goose wakened him. He said, "We must make haste. It will snow here soon. We cannot wait." So the geese flapped their wings and flew slowly and heavily along. Raven led the others with outspread wings. He was always above or ahead of the others. They said, "See how light and graceful he is." Thus they traveled until they came to the seashore. They feasted upon the berries and the bushes around it. Soon they were asleep. Early the next morning, the geese made ready to go without breakfast. Raven was hungry, but the geese would not wait. As they flapped their wings and started, Father Goose said, "We will stop once on the way to rest. Then our next flight will bring us to the other shore." Raven began to be afraid, but he was ashamed to say so. The geese flapped their wings slowly and flew steadily, heavily along. Raven, with outspread wings, glided ahead. After a long time, Raven began to fall behind. His wings ached. The geese flew steadily on. Raven flapped heavily along, then glided on his outstretched wings. But he grew more and more tired. He fell farther and farther behind. At last the geese looked back. Father Goose said, "He must be tired. I thought he was light and active. We will wait." The geese settled close together in the water. Raven flew slowly up, gasping for breath. He sank down upon their backs. When Raven had his breath again, he put his hand on his breast. He said, "I have an arrow here from an old war. It pains me greatly. That is why I fell behind." After resting, the geese rose from the water. They flapped slowly along. Raven flew with them. After a while, Raven began to fall behind. He grew more and more tired. At last the geese looked back. Father Goose said, "He must be tired. We will wait." So the geese sank down together to the water, while Raven flew slowly up to them and sank down upon their backs. Raven said, "I have an arrowhead which pierced my heart in an old war. That is why I fell behind." Raven's wife put her hand on his breast. She could feel it beating like a hammer. She said she could not feel an arrowhead. So the geese rose again from the water. They flapped slowly along, but Raven's wings were very tired. Before long he fell behind again. Again the geese waited for him. Then the geese brothers began to talk among themselves. They said, "We do not believe he has an arrowhead in his heart. How could he live?" Now this last time when they rested, they could see the far-off shore. Father Goose said to Raven, "We will not wait for you again. We will not rest again until we reach the shore." So the geese rose from the water and flapped slowly along. Raven's wings seemed very heavy. The geese flew nearer and nearer the shore, but Raven flew nearer and nearer the waves. As he came close to the water, he shrieked to his wife, "Leave me the white stone. Throw the white stone back to me." It was a magic stone. Thus Raven cried. Then he sank down into the water, but the geese had reached the land. Raven tried to rise from the water. His wings would not spread. Raven drifted back and forth with the waves. The whitecaps of the surf buried him. Only once in a while could he get his beak above the water to breathe. Then a great wave cast him on the shore. Then he struggled up the beach. He reached some bushes where he pushed up his beak. Thus he became a small, dark-colored man. Then he took off his raven coat and mask. He hung them on a bush to dry. Raven made a fire drill out of dry wood and made a fire, and thus he dried himself. End of Raven's Marriage in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.
Sir Gawayne and the Green Knight, Book 1, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Amanda Chandler. Sir Gawayne and the Green Knight, Book 1. A 14th century poem done into modern English by Kenneth, Hare. Of the fashion of King Arthur's court at Camelot, and of his banquet made by him upon Yuletide, and of the coming of a fearsome master, which laid a challenge that Gawayne took up. When siege and battle shock had broken Troy, and burnt that burg to brands and ashes gray, when he that was for guile without alloy, unmatchable on earth did forfeit pay, tried and condemned by those he did betray. Aeneas then, a captain of the best, loosed fluttering sails upon the waterway with his high kith, and sea-tossed one in quest, new realms and golden islands scattered by the west. Then journeys Romulus with strength to Rome, building her white towers with a little band, when with much boasting thither did he come, and cast his anchors in the stranger strand, and named that Rome was erewhile waste and sand. From Piedmont eastward Langobarda won ground, and Tisius' navy rocked by Tuscan strand, but Brutus northward of the Silver Sound achieved these flowery meads, the fair delightful ground. A land of war, wreck, wonder, bale, and bliss, and of bold men that love debate, and wrought such marvels as from that time unto this no land can equal. Of Arthur, who is thought their courtliest king of all, I shall report the most outrageous wonder ever known, if ye will listen. It is no thing of naught, but from long years recorded and writ down, and I shall tell it as I heard it sung in town. The History. Arthur the king holds court at Camelot upon a Christmas tide. His princes there were from their many realms together got, to hold rich revel that is the flout of care. Quick as the nimble creatures of the air, they met in medley of the tournament, ofttimes beneath the fluttering banners rare, and thronged back thence to court, the long day spent, sworn brothers all alike to newer merriment. For this same feast was holden 15 days continuously, with all man could devise of meat and mirth, with gladsome glee always most glorious for to hear. By day they arise to sportive strains, nor do they close their eyes by night, but in the dance they mix anon lady with lord. Thus dwell they in such wise, ladies that lovelier lived there never none, with knights of most renown, excepting Christ alone. With all the joy in life they met together, each with the lady to himself most dear, caught by that Christmas tide into one tether. Comely was Arthur, king, by dais there, and of all ladies loveliest, Guinevere. Arthur was lofty of spirit, brave in fight. His men attend by the dais this new year his progress, brought to hall with many a knight, and now the sewers bear aloft the silver bright, as clerks make end their chanting of the mass, and set the dishes in a double share to all the knights beside the king's high place. Loud rose their cries, these clerks and others there, who name in drinking Christmas and New Year, and some hold gifts behind them in one hand, and ask the ladies to debate with care, and choose. These laugh to be with guile outplanned, but laugh the more to have them, you may understand. This mirth they make ere yet the meat is brought, then wash, and all to supper take their way, the higher marshalled, as was fitliest thought, by higher seats. In the midst, in royal array of thin-spun silk, sits Guinevere the gay at the rich dais, beneath a canopy that doth the tapis work of tars display, with fair Toulouse, enwoven joyously with gems, of price with pennies you should think to buy. She was the loveliest lady to descry, with her grey eyes on any summer day. Who boast a fair to have seen with eye, speaketh, but speaketh false, I dare well lay. Now Arthur might not eat. I have heard say he loathed long sitting, restless as a child in all its jolly madness, and as gay in life's delight, his brain and young blood wild keep him from resting, and as yet unreconciled. Old custom stays his hand from dish and cup, to drink the red wine or the nappy ale, till some newcomer break the matter up, of an adventurous chance the uncouth tale, yet such as with the credence might prevail of the wise men, to be not held a lie. Of princes and their arms and silver mail or kindred matter, lacking history, a knight must seek his counter and his jeopardy, set life at hazard of the chanceful lists, as trustless fortune shall adjudge the game. This was his custom at the time of mists, when frost with winter airs at Yuletide came, and therefore, though he may not eat for blame, he talks the trifles that kings talk at feasts. Gawayne and Gawayne, pillars of fame, each side the queen attending her behests. With Owain and with Baldwin were the chiefest guests. Baldwin the bishop, Owain Urien's son, Gawayne Gawayne Arthur's nephews were. At other boards sits many a princely one. Then comes the first course with loud trumpets blare, those golden reeds which painted banners bear. The noble pipes, the little kettles sound, wild warbles wakening startle the clear air, till the heart leaps for joy, and all around grave seneschals direct bright platters over ground. So plenteously, 'twere hard to set aright one silver dish the more, clean upon cloth. Fresh food was there, abundance of delights. To each twain dishes 12, and, nothing loath, goblets of beer and of the bright wine both. Now you have guessed, wherefore of this no more, that staring want but little business doth in this bright dwelling, but, the first course o'er, came more sounds than clear music, as at the great door. A fearsome master entering stays the mirth, from neck to loins most stoutly built of brawn. Mayhap he was the greatest of the earth, for giant-like so rode he oft by lawn. Great-backed, great-breasted, though his belt was drawn, and waist and belly slenderly beseen. Unblithe by twilight, ere the cocks have crawn, were he to meet, though fashioned well and clean. For both his hue and favor were the deep ink green. Even all was green, this fellow and his weeds, with a green coat close clinging to his side, o'er which a peerless mantle brave succeeds, lined with bright fur, and that displayed for pride. Likewise his furred hood with the green was dyed, though now caught back and clasped and hanging low. His green hose grip his calves. There might be spied striped silken straps beside, with goodly show bracing the bright clean spurs that gleam and greenly glow. Gay shoes he wore, and the rare emerald powdered with green stars all his bright array. His silken striped belt the gleam exhaled and always sparkled. Flies were broidered gay with the gems in the saddle silk. It would dismay to tell but half his gauds, both low and high. Those gold stuff beads of green and birds, I say, 'twere pain to tell of them. The patral high was swung with golden bells, and ringing jauntily. The stirrups, tail strap, bridle, and saddle bow were green, or else a glimmer with green stones. The steed himself who carries him can show no hue save green, or what with green atones, his bridle broidered. That horse was large of bones for managing by any of a rabble, but for the present master that he owns, he found him ever his best horse in stable, unto all strange adventures ready and serviceable. As the steed's mane was green, so the knight's hair was likewise green, and by the shoulders hung in wavy locks. And his great beard in air seems a green bush when rainy spring is young. His sweeping sleeves as now full closely clung, looped by the arms and gathered in a knot. The silken trappings they trailed not among, but fixed there fast, as do the cloaks of kings that close about the throat. The mane was kempt and clean and fresh and fine, and crisped in many a strange, fantastic knot. There was no single hair that did not twine about a thread of gold that loosened not, bound all with ribbon. Nor had they forgot the forelock. Both were bound and gold entwined, and all the tail's length myriad jewels dot in sparkling eyes. A thong doth all upbind, with peal of little bells to ring upon the wind. Like the bright lightning in the nether air, it seemed, so they that watched him inly swore. It seemed that no man mortal anywhere might bide his blow and live. Yet strange, he wore gorget, nor helm, nor bright shield nevermore, nor any plate pertaining unto arms. But all red berries, high in hand he bore a holly bush, that never frost alarms, greenest of earth's green things in height of winter harms. In the other hand he bore, what can be liked for savagery to naught that can be told, say who will, an axe broad-edged and spiked, the spike and wrought of green steel and of gold, the head an ell-yard long, and gleaming cold beneath the burnish, shaped shrewd blows to deal, and sharp's a razor. The huge head keeps his hold upon the stock, bewound with strands of steel inlaid with green, and there beside looped up with zeal. And all adown the shaft, and knotted oft, there runs a thong whence tassels sprightly dance. Thus moves this knight, but nothing fair nor soft, drives to the high seat, dreading no ill chance, saluting none, but with a scornful glance. "Where is," he cries, "the governor of this rout? I'll reason with him here if he advance." He rolled his eyes and glares on all about, while him of most renown he strives to single out. A hush falls. All men wondering behold the green man, greener than the grass dew wet, or green enamel upon flaming gold. Some slightly move, as nearer him to get. More sit stone still, and utter silence met his asking. All men gaze with doubtful eye. Sights they had many seen, but one not yet wrenched from the world more wondrously awry. Wherefore the king's word died, the minstrel's melody. As they were slipped on sleep, and slumbered all, they deem these things illusion fairy, and no sound wakens, nor no light foot fall. Some, that would speak, withhold through courtesy, that he to whom they all owe fealty may speak before them. Wherefore in short space, Arthur, the king, makes answer fearlessly. "Warrior, a while light down our feast to grace. Then what thy will is, we will learn in time and place. Not so by him that sitteth upon height, to dwell here any while is not my will. But sith the praise is gone forth of thy might, that men esteem thy burg the noblest still, thy men the bravest, riding upon hill their fleet steeds, and of skill well proven and shown in knightly games, I thought it not so ill, bethinking me of thy high dealing known and courtesy, to come here, claiming as my own the right to seek some knight in knightly play, and for a pledge of peace I bear this vow, I would no war in weeds of holiday. I have at home hauberk and helm I trow, shield and sharp spear and fighting gear enow. Then grant me fair the game I ask by right, seeing that the garb I bear makes softer show. I seek no harm, but come for pastime dight." And Arthur made reply and said, Sir courteous knight, if thou cravest battle, seek thy counter here. Nay, 'tis not battle I seek, he cries again. Among these beardless babes, what is to fear? For were I on a high steed armed, why then, weak though I be, I think among these men there's none to match me. Hearken then and know what knight soever, bold of blood and brain, dare proffer and have back of me one blow with this axe. Let him keep it, it is heavy enow. And if I bide the first, I little reck. And now if any knight a game would win, and with this rich axe strike me by the neck, he need but leap here, have it, and begin, while I stand stiff as stone this hall within. He keeps the axe to boot. His respite out, a day and 12 month, when next Yule is in, he must come seek my dwelling with no rout, there have his counter buffet, let him never doubt. If still at first, were they not stiller now? No sound at all uprose from any side. The Green Knight settles him by saddle bow, and rolls his red eyes searching far and wide, whoso should rise, and his lithe fingers tied, which twitching in his green beard never cease. Then coughed, and with loud tone of insult cried, Are these knights Arthur's that whole realms deprize, whereof the rumour runs through many provinces? What boots your boasting, your high insolence, your pride, your wrath, your victories all and each? For now the whole of your renown flies hence, sped thither by the words of one man's speech. Why, the rogues shake beyond my axe's reach. With this he laughed so loud, his whole face lined with wrinkles. But his blushing doth appeach the king's hot shame. Then, folly shalt thou find, he cries in tones of menace like the rising wind. For by heaven thou dost seek no other thing, yet know I none of thy great words afeard. The axe, here, and for God's sake, cries the king, striding upon him. The other his bulk upreared, and vaults to ground, and standing overpeered by the full head all other in the house, as with a stern cheer, stroking his great beard, and drawing down his coat. His head he bows, no more dismayed than if one had brought him to carouse. Herewith Gawayne from by the queen's high place leans forward crying, Lo, I thus openly beseech my lord to grant me of his grace to have this play. For if he summon me, I may approach with no discourtesy, if my liege lady think thereof no ill. For when a challenge is preferred so high before your court, though you would have it still, yet do these many knights but wait upon your will. It were unseemly then, as may be guessed, if all we stir not, none alive more able than your knights hereabouts, and I, the least in wit and worth of any of your table, shall least be missed. In nothing commendable am I, save your blood, uncle, in my veins. Then sith this thing is but despicable, not worthy your endeavouring, what remains? Give it me that first asked it, fitter for my pains. If I speak ill before your knights, let them determine. Whispering then, all judge the same, to free the wearer of the diadem, and to Sir Gawayne to decree the game. So Arthur calls him, and Gawayne ran and came and knelt unto him. He lifts him decorously, gives him God's blessing, and speaks thus free from blame. Counsel him, merry coz, so cunningly that time enough go by ere he reply to thee. Now has Gawayne the axe, and should have hacked, save that the other, but with unblanched face, stayeth him, crying, Renew we first the pact. Deliver me on oath thy name and race, that I may know thee at the trysting place. Good faith, I, Gawayne, do this buffet drive, and then a day and 12 month past in space, myself armed how thou wilt, engaged to arrive at thy house, having for company no man alive. Thereto the Green Knight answer makes again. God, cries the Green Knight, this delighteth me. So may I ever thrive as I am fain to have my blow. Thou dost so readily rehearse the compact. Yet this swear to me. Swear thou to seek me out upon what strand thou dream'st me living, there to have pay and fee. Thy name nor place I neither understand, warrior, where thou dwellest nor in what strange land. By him that wrought me, speak, where lies thy shore, lest wandering I lose thee gone astray, whom yet I swear to seek. He cries, no more. One oath sufficeth on a New Year day. If I shall tell thee, having had my pay, where lie my lands, set forth and nothing doubt. But if I speak not, then the other way. Thou without blame mayst tarry with this rout, and live long in thy land, and never wend thereout. Take thy grim tool. Let's see thy striking now. Gladly, cries Gawayne, making ready bound, and plants his feet. The other lowers his brow, and strokes his green locks forward from his crown, and low and lovely did they fall adown. Then Gawayne gathers the great axe upon height, and shears through flesh, fat, bone. Over his gown the green head totters, drops, rolls, and in despite many start forth to spurn and kick it from their sight. The axe stood buried deep in the floor of the hall, then o'er the green outtwines the oozing blood. But that dead body doth not falter nor fall, but starts forth stiffly where the princes stood, grasping with one dead hand as it were wood, to find its head, and clutched and caught it fair, makes for the horse, the nearest way that it could, bearing his own head by the bloodied hair, as him no mishap ailed, all headless though he were. Striketh the stirrup, vaults his horse's back, then moves slow round that ugly trunk that bled. For matter of disquiet few men lack, as toward the dais he sets the streaming head, whose eyes unlocking show bloodshot-en red and staring broad. Then speak the moving lips, that thou be ready, even as thou hast said in these nights' hearing, lest thy fame eclipse, look to it ere away thy day, and 12 months slips, to have my stroke against that thou didst show me. Get thee to the Green Chapel. Bring no friend. The Knight of the Green Chapel, many know me. Thou knowest thy compact. Forget not, wend, or be known recreant till thy life shall end. He wrenched the reins, and suddenly both were fled through the hall door, but whither no mortal gleaned. For from their sights he charges with the head, and ever the flint fire of the hoofs flies out, blood red. They marvel where he goes, those mazed men, but that can none resolve of all the press. Naught is but question and surmise. What then? They hold this thing a miracle, I guess. Arthur with Gawayne laughs at this strangeness, but cloaks his wonder, saying to the queen, Dear dame, what cheer? Take nothing in distress. Apt it is this craft that we have seen. A fitting feasting fellow was this man in green, who graced our dancing, singing, and delight, and yet a strange one I will not deny. But now to supper will I take me right, and with glad heart do all things merrily. He turns then on Gawayne a glancing eye. Up with thine axe that hath so amply mown, up with it high upon the tapestry. And as the king bade, straightway was it done. There by the truest token it makes true things known of strangest happenings. Then they throng again unto the boards, these gay knights all a rout. Arthur was brought to place, and Sir Gawayne, and nimble sewers deftly bear about, to each a double portion without doubt. And minstrels their sweet airs play delicately till daylight dies, that is with mirth drawn out in many lands. Yet Gawayne, look and see, that when thine hour is out, there shall no tarrying be. End of Sir Gawayne and the Green Knight, Book 1, in Myths and Legends Around the World, Collection 12.